All right, well, good morning and afternoon, everyone. So, I want to mention, a little bit of what James had iterated about sort of my past and sort of what's happened in my career over the past year and a half. So I worked at Google for 5 years, and then after this whole Top Shot competition and winning it, part of my prize package was a professional marksmanship contract with the show's sponsor, which is Bass Pro Shops. And so for the past year and a half, I've been traveling the country, meeting all sorts of people in the gun industry. And for me, I was a complete outsider to the industry. I had almost zero contacts in my Rolodex. And what I want to do today is share a number of things that I've observed over the past year and a half. We'll be talking a little bit about some facts and figures and some data, and also dive a little bit into assault weapons and gun history in our country. So, right, I think as tech people here, we're always looking at what is the root cause of a problem. Right? So I'm not a programmer, but when I was at Google, I was on a technical support team and worked with engineers on trying to solve customer problems. And so finding this root cause of a problem it can be a very tricky thing. A lot of people may think that the cause of gun violence is guns, but obviously there's a very strong case to be made that the cause of gun violence is people. People deciding, whether consciously or unconsciously, to make a decision to use guns as use guns with a violent purpose. So here's an interesting question, right? Or some people just say this is a statement that, more guns will cause more violence. And on the face of it, that seems to make sense, right? If there's more weapons, there's going to be more violence out there. But I think the interesting part here is what the data tells us. And so let me show you one figure here. All right, so here is what the quantity of guns in the United States has looked like since 1994. As you can clearly see, we have many more guns. And obviously the last data point here is 2009, 310 million guns in the United States. And so we have...
Are these consumer, or does that include military and police and all that?
That's a really good question. I'd have to dig into the source a little bit further. I imagine it is total guns, including law enforcement and military, but it actually might not be the case. Great question.
The stats that I have, that's actually just in the consumer, in the civilian population.
Okay, good. So so we have a comment here that this is most likely just the civilian numbers. And so in the past 3 years, that number has for sure gone up. I don't know what the exact number is for like 2012 or 2013. But the main point here on the slide is that we have seen a pretty significant increase in the number of guns in the United States, and it's continuing to go up. Now, this slide here shows the estimated murder rates in the United States since 1968. The top line here is the overall murder rate. This thicker dotted line is firearms violence, and then the skinnier dotted line is the non-firearms murder rate. And so if you look starting at like 1990, you see a precipitous drop. And then as you go into the 2000s, you continue to see a little bit of a flat line, and then a drop from 2007 to 2010. So you put those two pieces together, and obviously, it's not saying that correlation is causation, but it's an interesting thing to think about when you look at the data and you look at the trends. So, one thing that I think really stood out to me when I was, looking at this gun violence problem that we have in our country is that if you look at the data over the past 10 years, approximately 30,000. There are approximately 30,000 deaths caused by gun violence, and approximately 55 to 60% of those are suicides. Now I know whenever there's a shooting, there's always a lot of focus about, well, okay, gun control, assault weapons, 30-round magazines, but suicides here are the bulk of the problem. And I look at this information, I say to myself, okay, yes, I mean, guns are a part of this equation, but we have a suicide problem, right? What's causing people to, well, I mean, one, in the first place, decide to take their life? I think, why they decide to take their life with a firearm, I mean, that's an ancillary, kind of secondary question, but really back to that root cause of the problem, right? People aren't killing themselves because there's a gun laying around, but they're choosing to kill themselves for other reasons. So this suicide piece of data really stood out to me, and I'm really excited that the Highground Hackathon is really focusing on this mental health issue, and this is, I think, a topic that we need more information, more data, and obviously more solutions. And I think the reason why I'm here today is because I firmly believe that there is a technology solution or solutions to a lot of these problems. So that suicide point is an interesting one. Now, going a little bit further into the data, I think we have a pretty significant data problem, and it's very one-sided. Right? So we have all this information about firearms, homicide, and suicide rates, but we don't have any concrete information on how often guns save lives. So, for example, if someone is out on the street and they're going to get mugged or robbed, and if they present a firearm as a means of preventing themselves from getting robbed, and they call 911 afterwards and the police file a report, that incident doesn't get registered as a successful defensive use of a firearm. And one could argue that that mugging, right, could have turned into a murder, and therefore the gun saved their life. That's obviously, it's a tricky thing to measure. But anyways, the point is that a gun used in a successful defensive situation is data that is not currently being captured in a systematic way. And I think the main point I just want to make is that there's a balance in this gun violence debate that yes, like guns can be used to kill people, but guns can also be used to save people. And if we want to be empirical about it, we have to have good data and good numbers. So really quick, I mean, I think this piece is interesting here. I mean, there's estimations, right, as to how many times a firearm is used in a successful self-defense situation. I mean, 60,000 to 2.5 million occurrences a year. I mean, that's a huge range. But right, let's just take the lower end, right? 60,000 people's lives have been saved compared to the approximate 30,000 deaths a year. So again, sort of an interesting data point to think about, and to think about this data problem that we have. Now, I think something that isn't talked enough about on the gun owner side of the equation is gun culture in America, and trying to get a better understanding of why gun owners get so emotionally visceral when talk of gun control comes up. And I think this first point here is really key to understanding this. And what the point is that gun ownership for many, many Americans, it's part of their core identity. When they think about who they are as a person and the values that they represent, gun ownership is very front and center for people. It's as front and center as your gender is for some people, your job title, your religion, your sexual orientation. And so it's a very, very personal piece. And I think to help understand what's going on, right, when there's talk of gun control happening, gun owners feel like that they're being personally attacked, right? That we're basically attacking a core part of who they are, and within the context of gun control, that gun control advocates are trying to take away a piece of who they are. So whether you agree or disagree with that, I think the point is that gun ownership is a part of people's core identity, in many other states and parts in our country, gun ownership is a family tradition. It's a way of life. And that's how deeply embedded gun ownership is for a lot of people. Yeah, so the question in the back was to talk a little bit more about this concept of gun ownership as being a part of someone's core identity. And I guess I can use myself maybe as a little bit of an example. I mean, I grew up in Orange County in Southern California. Pretty conservative area, but not a huge gun culture. I grew up with guns in the household. My father taught me how to shoot when I was 6, but it wasn't something, I would not consider it to have been a family tradition by any means. My father would take me out to shoot maybe once every 3 or 4 years, and then the guns go back in the safe, and I don't see them, for another, 3, 4 years type thing. But for other Americans, shooting is a weekly event. It's when Thanksgiving and Christmas time come around, instead of going to the store to buy a turkey or to buy a hog, it's, all right, we're going to go out and hunt for the family dinner because it's cheaper. And the thing about specifically hunting is it's a bonding activity. Given any situation, when you spend a prolonged amount of time with someone or a group of people out in the middle, either out in the middle of nowhere or in a room like we're in here today, I mean, there's just naturally a certain amount of bonding that happens. And there's, it's again, just part of that family tradition where you're spending time with loved ones, not specifically right in a hunting capacity. But right, if you think about all these trips, hunting trips, and positive shooting experiences that gun owners have, that's a lot of memories, right? A lot of good, positive memories. And for gun owners, a lot of us have very positive associations with guns. Now, that's obviously counterbalanced by a lot of the negative things that happen, right, in the media and a lot of these, either mass shootings and also a lot of gang violence that is a significant part of the approximate 10,000 homicides every year. And so hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight into sort of where this family tradition and where it's a core part of people's identity. Yeah, and so the question was, right, are things changing? There seems to be an increase in, the question up here was, about high power rifles and 30-round magazines and such. And so the trends are definitely changing. The AR-15 is the most popular rifle in America today. So when there's talk about restricting AR-15s, you're talking to a large, significant portion of gun owners. So this isn't, the AR-15 is not some weapon that only a small portion of Americans own. This is a significant portion of our country that own AR-15s. And I'll be talking a little bit about, I'll be closing with a little bit of a narrative on this point and how things have changed, and perhaps the story will be interesting. And here's the point, actually. A question I think we've all heard over the past, I guess a year and a half, maybe even longer, right, is why does a civilian need an AR-15 and 30-round magazines? And I think part of what is challenging for non-gun owners to understand is, and I think understanding your own personal context for firearms is really important here. Where if all you've seen of AR-15s is negative publicity in the media with shootings, if you think about video games, if you think about movies and TV, and I think a lot of the time we only see guns in the context of death. That's, I think, just a part of a big part of Hollywood and what we're seeing in the media. But anyway, so with this question, right, why would a civilian ever need an AR-15 and 30-round magazines? I want to tell a story that highlights and answers the question. So in this first picture here, we're looking at a building that's burning. You see this thick, dark smoke that's partially obscuring the sun. What we're looking at here is the start of a riot in a major city where buildings are burning. Here's a street level view of this same riot, and you see the streets are fairly empty. It's a little hard to tell in with the glare here, but there are a few people here on the street, but it's pretty much vacant, and there's more buildings burning, and the fire is spreading. What we see here is a Korean business, and we have a car here and a car here, and then in the middle here it's also hard to see, but it's basically a bunch of chairs and tables that are blocking entrance to the store. They're trying to prevent looters from coming and stealing stuff. Up on the rooftop in the upper right-hand corner, we see some individuals, some men who own the store, friends of the owners, and they have guns. They have guns on the top of this building, and they are protecting the building. Here's a closer look. So one of these men, he's got a rifle. He's patrolling on a rooftop. And as you can tell in the lower left, As you can tell in the lower left-hand corner, this is from Channel 2 News. And so we're not talking about something that happened in Korea. This happened here in Los Angeles, California in 1992. And for anybody that remembers the Rodney King riots, it's not an untold story because the story has been told, but I don't think enough people know about what happened in Koreatown. I know I certainly forgot about what happened in Koreatown until about 6 months ago when I was in a gun documentary about our Second Amendment rights and looking at it from a civil rights perspective. And this Koreatown episode came up. And I remember it as a 12-year-old living in Orange County, about an hour away from where all this was happening. And at the time, I just remember noticing, right, something bad is happening, and I understood the racial implications of what was going on. But then to fast forward 2 decades and look at this episode as an adult, it was really interesting. And the interesting point was this. So the reason why you've got men who are protecting life and property is when the riots were occurring, the Koreans heard that the riots were coming into Koreatown, and they called the LAPD. LAPD, we need help. Please come and protect our property, protect our homes. There's looting, there's rioting, and stuff getting burned down. Please come and help. Anybody who remembers the LA riots, the LAPD was woefully unprepared, understaffed, and they basically told the Koreans, sorry, we can't help you. That's the inflection point right there, right? We rely on the police generally to protect us, but when the police can't be there for you, then who's responsible for your own protection and safety? And so this was the point where the Koreans, they brought out AR-15s and 30-round magazines and shotguns and pistols, and they protected their own property and lives because the police weren't able to come. So obviously, civil society breaking down is a very, very rare thing, but obviously it happens. And I just hope that this one story is an illustration of I believe a valid use and reason why someone would need AR-15s and 30-round magazines. Obviously, there's room for disagreement, as I see in the middle here, which is totally fine, and I think it's part of the debate and the discussion. Good point. Yep. So the question, or the comment here was, right? You look at the data, and right, how many riots have happened since 1992 versus how many mass shooting incidents we've had with AR-15s. It's a good point. I guess the way that I look at it is, there's been an estimation of 1% to 3% of shootings in America have been, there's been an AR-15 used, and so I guess 1% to 3%. Just statistically speaking, that's a low percentage.
But it's still a hell of a lot more than AR-15s being used to stave off rioting?
Yes, yeah, absolutely right. It's a hell of a lot more than a riot situation. But what's the bigger picture? Bigger picture is, right, I mean,
People dead over the last.
yes, but right, if we're going to talk about like specific types of weapons, handguns. Yeah, thank you for the comment. I mean, you know, what your friend mentioned about, right, it's his right to purchase as much ammo and to have as many guns as he feels is either necessary or if it's even just a simple want. I mean, we have the Second Amendment in the United States, which I think is the one, I think, big difference if you're going to look at like the United States versus other countries and their cultures. That, you know, I think we have to face a fact that guns are a part of American culture, and at a very high level, right, guns aren't going anywhere. But then if we dive into some of these details about, right, assault weapons and 30-round magazines, right, it's like, or 100-round magazines, etc. And I guess to reiterate the point that there's a balance, and my point here today is not necessarily to convince you of a different viewpoint, but I want at least to help elucidate and help you understand, just the understanding that there is a different perspective. And this is not a clear cut and dry issue, right? Like, oh, well, we should just, do away with AR-15s and 30-round magazines. Again, back to that core identity that some people, I mean, part of who they are is, their AR-15 and 30-round magazines. So it's a tough issue to discuss. It's a really good question. The question is, what in my opinion, what would a balanced, policy look like? And it's obviously just such a tricky issue. I guess I'm on the side of mental health being a big focus, in this gun violence issue. Excuse me. And if you look at the discussion that our country's had over the past year and a half, we're nowhere close to getting any sort of agreement on background checks or universal background. We already have background checks. Universal background checks is about ramping that effort up. And obviously we're just becoming, I think, even more polarized around AR-15s and 30-round magazines. And so what would balance, I'm not even sure whether right now, I don't believe there's a balanced, yeah, the balanced approach thing, that's a much more difficult question. I think when I was mentioning balance, I think it was more just of an awareness that there are two sides of the coin, that guns aren't just used for death, but they are used to save lives, and that's the balance that the idea that I wanted to at least bring forward. Your story is a good one. I think we have to consider, I forget what the psychological term is, but right, the bias that we all have when we take our own personal experiences and just apply them to a general situation, because for every one story like this, where you feel like
trying to hang.
So yeah.
So I think, let me just jump in a little bit here. So all these points are very valid. I've been through the same journey that you're going through as you're trying to understand and take up your positions relative to gun control. What Chris is doing here, I think very, very bravely, is trying to provide a window into parts of America that are outside of our own personal experiences, San Francisco Bay Area, where we have a particular leaning and a particular bent. As part of Highground Hackers, the reason why we have the name Highground is that we're taking the high ground is when you come in here, we leave politics and policy at the door. And we try to look at the situations and the scenarios that we're trying to find solutions for, if I may. So the key point being, though, is that when you look at the aggregate, the questions that we're all raising around policy and what is happening in Washington and different types of guns and things like that, we can't be looking to them for salvation and solutions. The reality is, if you take America as an entity, it's going through a cultural shift. A lot of demographics are moving in optimal directions in terms of the number of families that actually own guns is going down, but the number of guns that are actually owned by individual families are going up. So lots of things are happening now with America as a country And what we need to be looking at are situations such as, how do we help you in not getting mugged in the first place, whether it's by gunpoint or not? How do we address something? Oh, absolutely. So here's a very specific, and the reason why Chris was here, and we had Nico Tuso, retired commander of the largest SWAT team in California. We had a number of other gun owners at our first hackathon. It's one of the challenges we have in the gun owning community can be broadly called gun owner responsibility. There are a lot of people out there that own guns that think they buy a gun, they put it in the bedside table, think their job is done. How do we have applications that can promote responsible gun ownership, for example, get them educated in making sure that their guns are locked up and safe, that they are having them properly under lock and key when they're not being used, etc. So we're trying to bring in perspectives that are outside of our norm and seeing if there are engineering solutions to problems that we have that are outside of our regular existence, because we don't live around guns. I don't live around guns. I don't associate a gun with my own personal identity, but there are millions of Americans that do. How do we help them to make sure that the guns aren't getting into the wrong hands? How do we help them with potential tendencies to suicidal violence?
Well, so thank you for your comment. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing what I think is a very personal story, and I'm glad you are still here with us and you decided to take the better path. And thank you for sharing that with the group. I think when it comes to suicide prevention from the lens of a gun owner, from a gun owner's perspective, safety and security, right? Securing your firearms so they are not accessible by unauthorized persons like felons or children or mentally ill. So if I was living with someone who I knew to be depressed or suicidal, I need to make sure that my guns are secured in a way that they can't access them. So I think to directly answer what is what's the gun lobby's position on that is.
That protects your family, but what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is now outside of my area of expertise, right? We're diving into mental health and like suicide prevention. I mean, generally speaking, I think it's good for people to reach out, right? I'm sure, right, when you were having problems, I hope you were leaning on, family and friends and getting, input and support from them. And I think at a very high level, when I think about this gun violence discussion that we have in our country, it's my hope that this is not, I know we're going to disagree, right? There's no, candy coating this, and I don't think a goal of getting us all on the same page is realistic. But what I do hope is that this is an issue that can bring us together, because at a very high level, this is about saving lives. We may have disagreements on the best ways to do that, but we're all working towards the same thing, right? We want to reduce gun violence. We want to reduce violence in general at a very high level, and it's a very complicated situation, right? And if there was a simple solution, we would have already done and implemented the solution. And so, right, we're gonna iterate and just try and see in the end, what's ultimately gonna work the best, and we'll see. I think maybe have time for one more question, or okay, yeah. So this is a really good question. So I think something that helped me kind of understand this a little bit better was looking at the gun owner's perspective, and especially with regards to the history of gun control in the United States.
Password.
What?
Phones have passwords, guns don't.
Good point. But so, right, if you look at the Second Amendment in the text, there's a phrase that says, right, shall not be infringed. A lot of gun owners love to lock in on that phrase. It's the only amendment in the 27 amendments in our Constitution that has the phrase shall not be infringed. Now, if you look at, we obviously have, gun control laws and background checks, and so for a lot of gun owners, those are infringements and restrictions on, if you look at sort of the Second Amendment, in its purest term, it basically says that, the government doesn't have a right to tell me or any American, what to do with my guns, how much ammo or how many guns I own. And so this is, again, just representing the purist's view. And so the reason, to your point about, why isn't there compromise or an openness or willingness to talk about further restrictions, because a lot of gun owners feel like that there's already been enough compromise. And some people would say that there's been too much compromise. And it's a slippery slope. So here's an example. 30-round magazine in an AR-15 is standard. Like that's 30 rounds is a standard capacity magazine. Here in California, it's a 10-round magazine. If you buy an AR-15, you can only buy a 10-round magazine. So we've gone from 30 to 10. Now, if you look at what's happened in New York passed a law, and this is now with handguns, not with AR-15s, but magazines can only hold a maximum of 7 rounds. And so here's a slippery slope. So it's 7 rounds right now in New York. Well, then is it going to be 5 rounds, right, somewhere else? And then, right, so this compromise, a lot of pro-gun people just see, right, it's a slippery slope where we're not getting more rights from a gun owner's perspective. We're getting reduced rights, 30, 10, 7, right, and it's only, when the context of gun control, that number is only going to go, they want the number to go down. So hopefully that addresses your question, right? Where the compromise is just a slippery slope where in the end gun rights advocates don't really gain much. And there's no real good data to support that a lot of gun control measure works, especially if we're talking about 30-round magazines or larger capacity magazines. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, right? So the comment was that past legislation basically forbade the federal government from using federal funds to do gun violence research, and that's my understanding as well. And it's my understanding that the NRA and I don't know if there are other parties that supported that, and I think that's a bad problem, right? Like how can we look at the situation in any sort of objective way if our government's not allowed to fund and go out and pursue research? So I believe, I think President Obama, through executive order, I think there was some sort of workaround because there's a study that came out in July of this year, which is very interesting. If anyone is intrigued in looking at, I think it's a pretty balanced report where you didn't hear the pro-gun people jumping up for joy, and you didn't hear the anti-gun people jumping up for joy, and so I think that can be a good indication of balance, right? Where no side is. Mm-hmm. Great. All right, so I want to wrap things up and really thank everyone for taking the time out of your busy day. And again, my hope today was not again to convince you of a different perspective, but rather just expose you to a different culture, because it was new for me. Like I said, I've only been in this industry for a year and a half, and I'm still taking a newbie perspective and just trying to learn as much as I can and trying to be as open-minded as I can for myself. And so hopefully the things that you've heard today might be insightful in either the apps or programs that you're developing. And so I'll be hanging around for probably a good 45 minutes here. So I'm happy to talk to anybody more about this. I think we're about to break for lunch and demos.
Yes.
Great, so please feel free to come and ask me any questions or comments. Thank you again.